What's good? Welcome to another tutorial. Today we're going to be learning SvelteKit by building this front-end application. It's pretty fun. Basically, we can just type in some stocks. For example, NVIDIA. Let's see if that works. Pulls all the stock information. We can compare it. We can graph it, look at the price history. It's super cool. You can get rid of stocks, all that kind of great stuff, and then add them back in. And yeah, it's just going to be excellent. We're going to be using SvelteKit, Tailwind, CSS. In a previous video, we built the backend system for this. So if you're curious, check that out. And without further ado, well, actually, last thing. This video is also going to teach you how to consume an API endpoint in SvelteKit. So it's all great content, shouldn't take too long. Learn all the basics of Svelte. Let's get into it. So the first thing we're going to want to do is start off by going over to TailwindCSS SvelteKit. And when we get there, they have some great guides, and we're literally just going to follow them. So I'm going to start off by opening up a terminal. I'm just going to cd into Documents, cd tutorials, cd make a directory called SvelteKit stocks, cd into SvelteKit stocks, and here we're going to make the magic happen. So we're going to start off by initting our project. So npm init svelte at next. What do we want to call it? I think it's going to make another folder, but that's all good. We'll just call it stock app. We're going to let that happen. Install create svelte. Yes. Go hard. Welcome to, we're going to go SvelteKit demo app. Skeleton project. Let's go skeleton project. Use TypeScript. No. Add s. No. Prettier. Yeah, sure. Playwright. Nope. Wow, that was really fast. Cool. So now we're going to list that. So we're going to cd into stock app, and we're going to do the rest of the instructions. So I'm going to copy them straight from here. So we're going to start off with npm, paste that in. That's going to install Tailwind. So this is all for the Tailwind configuration in SvelteKit, so we can just get that all working. Next, we have to create the config file. Make that happen and move some files, it seems. The next thing we're going to want to do is actually open up a code terminal. So I've got that magic command there, which just opens up my VS Code. And for the second, I'm just going to pop that over to the side and have that here. I'll just go a little bit further to the side. Cool. Just make that a little smaller. So we're going to have to come into our Tailwind config file and just copy that across. Add the Tailwind directives to the CSS file. So that is going to be just in here. We're going to have to make a file called, let's just make sure it's in the right directory. Source, new file, app.css. And in here, we're just going to copy in all of these little fonts, come into the app.css. I'm actually just going to not worry about that for the second. So now that we have that, we are going to follow the next instruction. So import the CSS file, and for that, we're going to have to make a layout file. So layouts are absolutely great. Basically everything you could want. So what we're going to do is in our source file, we're just going to go into our routes, and we're going to make a new file called __ layout.svelte. So all Svelte files have a Svelte suffix. And in here, we're just going to go script import .app CSS. Easy peasy. And then underneath here, we're just going to do exactly what they've done and just render out a slot accept instead of that. And so slot is basically just all the content that's going to go between our layout file. The other thing we're going to do in this file, just real quick, super good to do, is if you want to change the head, any head information, this is a great place to do it. So I'm just going to go Svelte head is the tag that you do, open that up, and I just want to change the title to stocks, just so it's a little tidy. And it looks like with that, we're probably pretty good to run our app. And so we're just going to do that with npm run dev. And just like that, the magic has happened. Everything is working. Let's see if our app loads. So I'll just go localhost 3000. And just like that, we have the SvelteKit documentation. It's all working. Our app is there. And if we came into our app.html, or even better, into our index, and just change this to say whatever we want, or for example, add a class here, class text green 200, we can see if that's working, and it is, which is magic. So we've just initialized our Tailwind project, our Svelte project with Tailwind, and now we're good to start consuming an API and build out all the components, routes, and everything like that. So let's close that. We're going to start off, where should we start off? That's a good question. We're going to start off in our app.html file, and we're going to do some initialization essentially with Google Fonts, because we're going to want some Google Fonts to style our document. So if we go to Google Fonts, make this a little bigger, come into here. I've already selected them, but I'm going to use Poppins for this particular. Actually, what I'm going to do is change my mind, remove all. We're going to go with Open Sans. And so in here, what I'm going to do is just select all the non-italicized fonts, and we're going to click the import statement, and we're just going to import our Google Fonts like this. So now that we have that line, we're going to come over to our app.css, and in here we're just going to come down onto a new line and go style, and we're just going to copy in that import statement right there. And then down in here we're going to apply some root styles. So we're going to go box sizing, border box, so that means all borders are contained within the total width of an element. We're going to go margin 0, padding 0, and lastly we're going to apply the font family to everything. So we're going to go font family, Open Sans, and we're going to give it a backup font of sans serif. Cool, so just like that, if we come into our app, these fonts will be now in Open Sans. Beautiful. So that's this page kind of initialized. We can close a bunch of these files. The next one we're going to start working with is our first route, I think, our index.html. And so if we come into here, currently we have this garbage that we don't need. So we're going to remove it, and we're going to start off by using a script to pull all of our content from the API. We're going to consume the API. And for that, we're going to have a special kind of script tag because we're going to give it the context of module. And essentially that means is that we want to, if a script has a content module attribute, it means that the information gets pulled from the API prior to the build stage of the app. So before it goes to render everything, this content gets pulled first, as opposed to a regular script tag that gets initialized with the build of the app. So this is the first step. And so this is great for API calls. And in this particular instance, what we're going to do is we're going to export an async function, and we're just going to call it load. And in here you pass two things. So we pass fetch and params. Params is like the URL parameter or anything like that, and fetch is obviously fetch. We're going to open this up as a function, and we are going to consume the URL, the API, the data API. So here I'm going to go const base URL is equal to, and in this case I'm going to go, this is from the project that I have already used, so you're welcome to use this API. You don't have to go and build your own. This will be live for you to use. You just have to know the secret key, which will come in this video. So that's the base URL for my backend, which sounds funny. And the next thing we're going to do is just for the second, we're going to say const data is equal to await. Let's think. So we're going to go await fetch. We're going to pass base URL plus the stock of choice, and we're going to plus query, a URL query parameter. So I'm just going to initialize stock here. Stock is equal to, let's just say mRNA. This is kind of like an API key that I've made so that only people who watch this video can consume that endpoint. And so the key is just James is cool. So you just want to make sure you pass that so that I know that you think I'm cool and so that you can get the information. Otherwise it will reject you. So now we have data. And I'm actually going to call that in this particular case response instead. And I'm going to go say const data is equal to await response.json. So just to convert any JSON that gets sent into readable objects. So now that we have the data, we're going to say, so if data, we're going to return, and this is basically where you return props and you inject them. So stocks, and we pass data, and so this is going to inject this data into our component, which we're about to define below. So this is just like, this is going to become more complex later, but this is just how we're going to pull data from our API into our app. So now that we've done that, we're going to have a second script tag. And what you do to fetch this information or to pass it into the application from this module script is, here we've named it stocks. You just type export let stocks, and that's going to initialize a variable called stocks that's going to receive that data. And so here, if we console.log stocks, we can see if we have pulled that information. And as you can see, it has pulled the information from the API endpoint, which is super nice. So we have all of the financial data, and we have the price history for the last 100 days of the different stock prices. So that is excellent. Congratulations. You have now initialized a SvelteKit app. You have consumed an API endpoint. You've imported Tailwind styles and Google fonts, and it hasn't even been long. We're ready to start building our app with the rest of our information. So I'm going to drink some water. The next step is to do something with this data. Let's see. Okay, and so for this, what we're going to do is come down here, and the great thing about Svelte is that it's very similar to just like standard HTML. You just have script tags, content tags, and style tags. And so here, all we have to do to render some HTML in our index is just have a section, and we're going to give it some classes of flex, column, and relative. And in here, you could just say, we're going to do some conditional rendering. So if stocks.length is greater than 0, so if it exists and it actually has some content, we're just going to render a component that we'll make in a second called stock list. And to pass props between components, all you do is you could say stocks equals stocks and pass the prop, just like you do in React, or you can do a bit of a shorthand and just say pass stocks, close that component, and that will pass that stocks information into the stocks component that we'll define soon. And to import the props into another component, all you do is you bring it in by saying export let stocks, and then you can do whatever you want with it, and that's brought it into that second component. And then after that, you just end your if block, And just like that, you have looked at conditional rendering in a section. Now, if you wanted to have styles in here, all you do is just pop a style tag down the bottom and do whatever you want with it. In this case, since we're using Tailwind, we're not going to stress it. But yeah, so currently it's not happy, and if I refresh that, it will continue to be unhappy because we don't have stock list. And so we're going to come into here, go up a directory, and make two components, two folders. The first one's going to be called two folders. We're going to have a components, and the second folder is going to be called stocks. And stocks is going to be for persisting data, and we're just going to have one file in stocks called index.javascript, and that's going to be kind of looking at using the store in SvelteKit, which is absolutely amazing. It's equivalent to like Redux or the context API, for example, in React. And in components, we're going to make a new file called stocklist. What am I doing? That is definitely meant to be a .svelte. And then if we reload that page, we should no longer get any errors. And it's actually cool because you can see that we're getting some server rendering of this information on both the front end and the back end. So up here, this data pulling and this data fetching is consoling on both sides. And so if I just resyntax that, everything's happy, the world continues to go around, we pull all that information, it's all good. So, what's next? We've achieved a lot so far. I think that the next thing to do will be... Now, I think, so the first thing we're going to do is actually come up into our layout component, I think. So, in our layout component, which we have here, which I'm actually going to move into... No, that's good there. That's chill. Yeah, 100%. Components should actually move up a directory. Move. And same with routes. Routes should be in source, not inside of... Sorry. Stocks should be in source, not inside of routes. So now here we have routes, stocks. Okay, that's much better. Okay, so we're going to come into routes and go into layout, and we're going to build our first component, which is actually going to be a navbar. And so what we're going to do here is we can just render out that content literally just like that. And so now we're going to have a navbar, which doesn't currently exist. So if we come into here and write nav, let's see, what do we want to call it? I mean, we could just go with nav.svelte to be fair. Rename .svelte. And this navbar is going to be where we enter all of our stock information. So up here we're going to have a script, and down below we're just going to render out nav, and inside of nav we're going to have a component called add stock. And this component is going to be created addstock.svelte, and addstock is going to be where we have our whole bar. And so this one is going to have a script. It's going to have some good logic in here, but we'll get to the logic in a second. First, what we're going to do is just... nav is not defined. Oh, that's right. You have to import the components, obviously. So if I think we should have an auto import. So if I go nav, it should nicely bring in that little statement for us, and we can re-render this component. We're still getting add stock is not defined. Yeah, so if I do the same thing in here, auto import, we get the add stock component, refresh the page, get the rebuilding, back to square one. Nice. So in here, we're going to start off with a div. This is going to have a class of relative. Open that div up. And we're going to do a few things in here. The first is we're going to have an input, and we're going to give it some fancy little titles. So the first one is we're going to bind it to a value. And so this is just essentially setting the value equal to a particular thing. And so we're going to call this input value. Now up here in our script, we're going to have to define input value. And so we're going to go input value is equal to an empty string. And so now the value of our input will assume whatever empty value is. So the next thing we're going to pass it as a type, and that's equal to text. Same as a regular input. We're going to go placeholder is equal to stock ticker. And lastly, we're going to give it a class. And class is equal to width full. So the full width, we're going to go background slate 900, padding y of 3, padding x of 4, text is going to be white, outline is 0, because inputs have an outline on select, and we're going to go text is equal to 4 extra large. So now if we close that input, we have a nice little stock ticker up here. And yeah, as I mentioned, this bind kind of does the whole thing of assuming the value and setting the state. So up here, if I were to console.log, for example, input value, we would see that as I change it, it's not currently showing it, but the value of input value will be changing. So cool, that's handy dandy. So now we've got a little input which is working, which is nice. The next thing we're going to do is have a conditional if block, so some conditional logic. So we're going to have an if active, and basically, actually we're not even going to do that, to be honest. Let's just render out a div. So we're going to put in an add button. So we're going to go div type is equal to submit on. This is how you add on click handlers, just on, and there's a lot of them. If you do on, it gives you kind of everything you can possibly do, but once again we're just going to stick with on click is equal to, pass it a function. We're going to call this update stocks, which we'll define in a second. And for the button, we're going to go class absolute. So it's important that we have class relative up here above, just like that. Class absolute, uppercase, top of 0, so right 0, so it sticks to the far right side. The height is going to be the full width. We're going to go flex, item center, padding x of 4. Background is going to be amber, 500, text white. Transition. So transition is basically for any kind of transition effects. And so in this case, we're going to say duration of 300. And so when we hover, we're going to go background amber 800 instead of 900. Oh no, sorry, 800 instead of 500. And we're going to add on to that text is extra large and cursor pointer, so that the cursor looks good when we hover over it. So now obviously we're going to have to close that div, and in the middle we're going to have add, just like that. And so now we have currently got no content rendering, and that's because it's unhappy. It doesn't like the fact that we don't have a function here. And so we're going to have to add in a function, and I'm just going to do that up here. So it's going to be async function update stocks. And for the minute, we're just going to console.log input value. So that should actually be a better way to look at the input value. So the app is happy. We have a nice little input button. And here, if I click add, we can see that the input value has been updating, and this bind has been doing exactly what we want it to do. Once again, excellent. So the last thing we're going to do before we work on all of the updating logic is we're going to work on the main display. And so the main display is going to be that graph component that if we come back over to the working version, when it all loads, which it does, it's just going to be this little graph display, which can be a little tricky to build so that it's totally responsive and that everything stays together nicely. But yeah, we're just going to make a bit of a custom grid. And so for that, if we come back over here, we're also just going to say input value is equal to that. So now whenever we add something, it resets it. Cool. So now that we have a working nav bar, this is actually a great opportunity to get into the store functionality, because that is going to be really important for saving all of our stocks to localhost, so that when the user reopens our app, it can render all of their stocks without them having to type them in all again. So it's just going to completely remember them. And that is why we have created this file just here, and this is where all of the magic is going to happen. So the Svelte Store that we're going to use, which is kind of like the global state, we're going to combine that with localhost. And to use the store, you go import writable from svelte/store, and you have to make sure you spell it correctly, writable. And you basically initialize it by saying const stock store dot sub is const stock store is equal to writable initial value. So the initial value that you wanted to assume. And in this case, we're just going to say const initial value could be equal to an empty array, for example. So that's a really basic way to initialize your store. In this particular case, it's going to be slightly more complicated because we want to use local storage. And if you want to use local storage in your project, what you're going to have to do is import browser from something called exactly that. And that will be, comes with the Svelte. And we're going to change this initial value to default value, because we're going to initialize initial value here. And so const initial value is equal to, and so we're going to check if the browser exists, json.parse window.local storage, and we're going to say .get item. And in this case, I'm going to call it stock list. That's just what I'm going to call it. And if that exists, it's going to return that. Otherwise, we're going to go for default value. Otherwise, default value. So that's just like the error handling that you have to use to access the local storage and initialize the Svelte store on page load. The only other thing that comes with this is that after here we're going to have to say stock store.subscribe, and we want the local storage state to be updated every time stock store changes. So we're going to write if browser, so similar thing, window.localstorage.set item. We're going to say stock list, and we're just going to pass it json.stringify value. And so that's going to take the current value of the stock store and write it to local storage. And the last thing you have to do is write export default stock store down here, and your store is pretty much good to go. We are just going to initialize one other store in here just for our modal, and so we're going to say export const modal is equal to writable, and we're just going to give it a default value of none, and that's going to be for when we choose to display this modal just here, but we'll get to that soon. So now that we have initialized our store, let's look at how we interact with it in our app. And so for that, we're going to come to our add stock component, because this is where all the magic is going to happen. So if we go to components, add stock. So in here, we're going to have to start off by saying let active, no, we don't need active. Let's just say we have to import the stock store. So we're going to say import stock store from /stocks. And since the file was an index.js file, it's just going to automatically import that index.js. And the next thing we're going to have to do is make some magic in here. So there's a couple of different ways that you can set the store value. There's actually 3 of them in particular. The one that we're going to, well actually if I just write them all out, so one would be saying stock store.set, and you could give it something new. So in this case I'm going to give it a new set, and the reason, and if you give it a new set for example, and so I'm going to give it the input value, which is whatever it currently is in an array, and I'm going to spread the stock store. And so this $ syntax just allows you to access the current value of the stock store. So that's one way you can do it. The new set just, so this is obviously an array. The set creates a unique array, so there are no repeated values because we don't need repeated stock tickers. So that's one way you could set it. Another way you could do it is just by going straight to stock store is equal to spread new set, pass an array, same thing as before, input value, spread the current value of stock store. So that would be a second way, and that's what we're going to use. But the third way you can do is say stock store.update, and you give it a current and you open it up and you return the same thing, new whatever, so on and so forth. But we're just going to go with the second method. And so now if we, for example, just console.log $stock store, this is how you interact with the store once again. So if we go here, every time we add a stock, we should be able to console log the state of the store. And this might break because we haven't initialized anything, but if I go ASD, you can see that we console.log the stock store, which is now ASD, so that's super nice. So now that our store element is working, that's actually everything we need to do on this particular page. What we're going to do is come into our index page and just interact with it a little bit here. And so if we go into source, routes, index, what we're going to do in this index page is we have to access the value in this module. So when we load everything, we're not just going to have a standard stock, we're going to load the array of stocks and pull all of that data before page loads. And so for that, we're going to go import stock store from same place, stocks. And here we're just going to say let stocks is equal to an empty array. And what we're going to do is use what they call, well, this is basically one way that you can just pull that information. So we're going to const unsub. So this just returns a function that allows you to subscribe to this information, which isn't what we want, but we're just going to go stock store dot subscribe. We're going to say the val, come onto a new line, and here we're just going to say stocks is equal to val. And so it's going to read the value of the stock store and assign it to stocks, and then underneath here we're just going to call unsubscribe, so we don't want to subscribe to that anymore. We've used up that functionality, we've assigned it to stocks, that's all good. So that's all working. And then in this function here, we're going to make a slight change. So we can get rid of stock, and here after we have base URL, we're just going to say const data is equal to await, and we're going to go promise.all and pass it an array so that we can return, we can send out a fetch request to my server for all these stocks asynchronously and in parallel. Because you could do it in series, but that's going to take you a while. So if you do it in parallel, it's just going to be infinitely faster. And so here it's just going to be stocks. So promise.all takes an array, so we're going to, an array of promises, so we're going to make an array of promises. And so that's going to be stocks.map. .map produces an array. We're going to go async stock, open that up on a new line, and we're just going to send out that fetch request. So if anything, we can actually bring that up in here and just say const response is equal to, that's literally it, that's perfect. And we can just return await res.response.json. And so, yeah, that's just going to create a whole bunch of asynchronous calls that happen in parallel, so it's going to be really super duper fast. Now, we don't need this step here, so we can just get rid of that completely, because we've got it just above. And so now, this is going to call for whatever stocks we have in our store, which is super cool. The only other thing we're going to do is use some initialization logic here. So we just want to set our store when our site loads. So down here, we're going to, let's see, what are we going to do? Actually, no, we don't need anything down here just yet. But essentially, so if I go mRNA, add, and refresh that page, it gets us an array of two things. It gets us the financials for mRNA, and then for this one, it's not happy because there's no information, it doesn't exist as a stock. So, you know, we can see that that's actually working. On page load, our local storage worked, so that all worked, which is really nice. The one other thing we want to do is that if we add a stock, we just want to make sure that the data is refreshed. So in this index file, what we're going to do is make a function called, well, actually, I guess more technically speaking, what we're going to do is we're going to have the equivalent of a use effect. So we're going to have a listener. So we're going to make a listener, so something that listens to the value of stock store. So it's like saying on change of stock store, we're just going to say get data. No, I don't want to get data. Why does it keep doing that? Get data, bracket, stock store. So it's saying subscribe to stock store and run this function every time stock store changes. And so here we're just going to define that function, async function get data, and we're going to say new tickers. Open that up on a new line, and down here what we're going to do is just make sure that there's no, you know, invalid or, you know, null kind of tickers. So we're going to say const old tickers is equal to what it was before. So we're going to go stocks.map val, just return object.keys val 0. So that's just going to return all of the tickers that we previously have, and here we're going to say if new tickers.length is less than old tickers.length. So this would be in the instance where a user deletes a ticker. We're just going to say return stocks is equal to stocks.filter val new tickers dot includes object dot keys val 0. And so that might be a bit of a confusing sentence, but it basically just checks to make sure that we're just filtering out the particular stock that we don't want anymore. So that's all good. After that, we're just going to say let difference equal to, so if this is like a guard clause because we return out of it if it works. Otherwise, we're going to say let the difference equal to new tickers dot filter val not old tickers dot includes val. And so basically what this expression does is it just calculates the difference. So we don't actually want to refetch all of these stocks all over again because that's just going to be useless and slow. We only want to fetch the new updated one and append that to the entire system that we currently have. So we're just going to have the same logic. So we're going to say const base URL is equal to whatever it was in our add stock. Nope, it wasn't there. Wasn't there. I'll just write it out again. So it is this line just here. And then we're going to say same thing as before, const data is equal to await promise.all, give it an array. So we're going to say difference, which is all of the new stocks that we've added, .map, async stock, open that up on a new line, const response is equal to await fetch base URL plus stock plus key equals James is cool. Cool. Then we're just going to do the same things before, const return res.json. And now that we've got that data, we're just going to say stocks is equal to data stocks filter stock filter for anything tragic or invalid. So sometimes we might get an invalid result. We're just going to filter them all out. Const ticker is equal to object.keys stock, access that first index, and we're just going to return stock, pass in the ticker, if it exists, prices, if it exists, length is greater than 50. So this is just going to make sure that we get a valid result back, and if it's not, it's going to filter it out. And so with that, all that funky logic, when we render this out here, let's see, so I could just have a function, well actually this subscribe function, this get data function is going to get run every time our stock store changes. So every time we add a stock, it updates our stock store, our new function gets run and it adds the data to the front. So here we should actually just be able to say console.log stock store. And if I run that, so this is our current stock store there, index.js, but it's actually not going to update that, it's just going to not display it on the screen. So you'll see how that works in a minute. So even better, what I'd be better to do is actually just display stocks. And when we run that, so that's the main thing. Then if I add an invalid thing, it only returns the valid array. And so that's what we want. It kind of filters out the rest of the not good content. So that's how you kind of use a use effect to work on a particular state change. So now that we have all of this working super nicely, we can finally move on to the last component, which is just displaying all of the information. Because obviously if I had PFE, add that in, I've removed the cursed statement, console.log stocks. So now if I add a valid stock ticker, it fetches them, it connects, it loads the array of stocks from local storage and all of our data. And so it found that PFE was a valid stock call, and so we get all the prices. So now we just need to show everything. But what I'm just going to quickly do is come into add stock, and when we have this input, I'm just going to add uppercase, just to make it look a bit prettier. So ASD, it's all uppercase, nice. Cool. So the final component. Now this one is a bit of a hefty component. Because we have quite a lot of like random variables and displays and stuff like that. So bear with me. We will get there. So if we come into this component, let's have a look. It is stock list. So we're going to need a couple of variables up here. First, we're going to have to import the stock store. So we know how to do that from stocks. Cool. The second thing we're going to have to do is import, well actually, we're going to make an array of titles from all the stocks that we have. So we're going to go row titles is equal to stocks.map stock. Actually, just let me come back here and check something. So I think down here, have I done that each? No, okay, so for the minute we're all good, never mind, that's chill. So if we come back in here and we go const key is equal to object dot entries stock, and what that's going to do is create an array that has the first index is going to be the key, and the second index is going to be the value, which is going to be the financials and prices. And in here we're just going to return object.keys key 1, which is going to be the financials and the prices, and we're going to go, so that's going to be key1.financials. So that's going to create all the titles. So it's going to read this financials object and basically extract all of these titles. So now that's going to be an array, so we just want to return the first index. Cool, excellent, handy dandy ultra. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to need some basic logic for displaying our modal, which is going to have all of our prices. So for that we're going to need let show equal false, and we're going to say let ticker is equal to empty. You'll see what they do soon. We're going to need a function that's going to toggle the show display of the price graph. And so in here we're going to say if show is equal to true, we want to set ticker is equal to empty, else ticker is equal to tick. You'll see what that does soon. Basically that's just selecting which ticker to display for the data, the stock prices. And down here we're going to say show is equal to not show. So that's just going to inverse the display of show. The next thing we're going to have is let show graph equal to false. So that's basically just going to display this button or not display this button. And we're going to say let vals equal to an array. So that's going to be all the prices. We're going to say let max equal max. Let max is equal to null. Let min equal to null. So nothing there just yet. And we're going to say function toggle graph is equal to show graph. So we're going to inverse whatever the current state is there. And if it's show graph, we're going to say vals is equal to stocks.find stock object.keys stock. So get the stock ticker is equal to ticker. So it's going to get all the prices, and so here we're going to go dot prices, abstract that, dot map, make a new array, val, and we're just going to go val dot replace any commas with nothing. And that's just for reading the max and min vals. Sometimes if you have a text file and you have commas and stuff, the math functions don't like it. So we're going to say max is equal to math.max, and you have to spread all the values. You can't pass an array. So we're going to math min is equal to math.min, spread vals. Cool. Else, what we're going to do is just set everything to null. So vals is going to be equal to empty array. Min is equal to null, and max is equal to null. Cool. So that's that little function. Now that's all of the logic done. Here is where it gets a little bit complicated. So we're going to go if, so we've got some conditional displays. So if the graph shows, we're going to do the graph. And so here you have to close the if, just like that. So that's a closed if statement. I'm going to do the graph soon, not immediately. Otherwise, we're going to have some guaranteed displays. So that's going to be div class. And here we're going to go max width of full. We're going to go overflow auto so that we get scrolling. Flex, gap 8, pt3, px4. Cool. So I'm going to open up that div. Now here we're going to do some mapping of content. So we're going to go for each. And in this particular case, I'm going to give it an object with the header ticker and just a random value, and you'll see what this does in a second. And then I'm going to comma ... stocks. So this is just going to make an array of all of the stocks so that we can get their tickers. And so each of these stocks, so stocks is an array of objects where the key, first and only key, is equal to the header. And so in this particular instance, I want this to say ticker and this to say NVIDIA. And so that's just what I'm doing here, is making a constant format that I can read concisely. So for each, and here you go as stock, and so it assigns it to stock for each particular one. And then we want to close the each. So now that we have all of these tickers displayed, what we could do is actually just go ahead and render them out, stock, and just see what it is that we get. So we're getting some feedback, we're getting some objects here. So that's not really going to do much good in this particular case, and that's because we're actually getting this object back as each of them. So if even better, let's just fix this up a little. So we go object.keys stock 0, that should give us the stock ticker. And so now you can see that we have a problem. Cannot convert undefined or null function.keys. Let's go ahead and just quickly go to application. And what we're going to do in this particular case is just clear our local storage. So stock list, delete. And if we refresh the app, we'll have absolutely nothing, empty array, so that's super cool. Let's add mRNA. And so you can see that the ticker kind of comes up how we want it to, so that's excellent. The next thing we're going to do is not actually have this div in this particular case. We have got some better logic to jump into. So let me just remove that and open up some new lines. So there's quite a lot of stuff that's going in here. So we're going to have a div, and this particular div is going to have a class equal to flex column, and gap 1. And then inside of that div, if I just get rid of that little quotation, we're going to open that up. We're going to have a second div with a class equal to uppercase, font, we want bold, actually, yeah, sure, bold, text extra large, close that, and in here we're going to have some conditional logic. So we're going to say hashtag if object.keys stock 0, so just like we had before, if that is equal to ticker, so in that first case, then we want to do something in particular, otherwise we're going to do something else. And so for that, we're actually going to have an else block, and so that's done just by including the semicolon else, and then we just close the if here. So in here, if we open up some new space, we're going to have a div, and this is going to have a class of relative, you'll see why soon, Z10, and select none, because we don't want the user to be able to select the text. And in here, we're just going to render out kind of what we had before, object.keys stock 0. And that will all have to be inside brackets, just like that. So there we have ticker. I actually think that's too bold, so we're going to go medium. Now, inside of the rest of our if else, we've got some other logic. So if I open that up and come in here, I'll draw, yeah, that's all good. So we're going to go a div, and this div is going to have a couple of classes. So class is equal to relative cursor pointer transition, love transitions, duration of the transition is going to be 300 milliseconds. We're going to go text align right, hover, opacity 50, hover, we're going to change the color of the text, text slate 700, and we're going to add an on-click event is equal to, we're going to pass it toggle show, and this is going to take the ticker name, so that's going to be object.keys stock 0, just as before. So that's this div, and inside of here we actually have another div, so this is going to be div with class, same as just above, so it's going to be relative z10 select none, close that, and in here we're just going to have, same as before, object dot keys, not jets, keys stock 0, and close that with that bracket. And we're also actually just going to include a break, not a div, /br, just like that, except the slash has to go on the other side, break, just like that. So now we have mRNA and it hovers, which we want. We don't have any functionality for that yet, but we will get there. So that is that little div, which is nice. Let me just get rid of some of this extra space. So after that div, we're going to have some conditional rendering. So we're going to conditionally render this little graph symbol to see if they want to show the graph. So we're going to say hashtag if, as per usual. And we're going to have two things. So if it's show and it's already on the state ticker, then we want object.keys stock 0, as per usual. I should just copy that at this point. And then down here we're going to want to close the if block. And in here we're going to have a div with a class of absolute, inset 0, so it takes the full size, flex, background, white, Z20, cursor, pointer, select none. Get rid of that little extra quotation, which is probably snuck on each end. Open that up, and then in here we're going to have another div. Got a few divs, and this one is going to have class of flex 1, so it takes up a majority of the space, background sky 800, text amber 400, text extra small, grid place items center, transition duration 300, and then after that we want some hover effects, so we're going to go hover opacity of 70, padding x2. So that's this div, and in here we're just going to say graph, and we're also just going to add in a on-click event. So when they click on this, what we want to do is not have either of these. We're going to say toggle graph, and that's going to be it. So that's all good. Now that we have the graph, we're going to have the second block afterwards, which is going to be the little close icon, so you can see how it differentially hovers them. So after this div, we have a second one, div, and this one, once again, has a few little good pieces. So we're going to have a class of, once again, text extra small, background amber 400, text sky 800, so it's the opposite, grid place items center, padding x1, transition duration 300, hover opacity 50, and padding x of 1. And for this one, what we're going to need is a on-click, click event handler. So this is just going to have to delete any stocks that we have. So in here we're going to pass it an anonymous function, open that up, and we're just going to say subscribe to the stock store, like we have earlier, is equal to, and set it to something new, so stocks, and we're going to say dot map val, and so that's going to be the object, and we will return the keys val 0. And then we want to filter, so that's going to be val. I'll open that up on a new line, and here we're just going to say val, so we want to return val is not equal to ticker, and val is not equal to the current object.keys stock 0. So if it is, it'll get rid of it. And so in this particular case, I'm not going to test it just yet. Well, actually, I guess I'll test it soon. We'll keep it there for the minute, but that should theoretically get rid of everything. And so inside this div here, when I open it up, it's going to automatically close it, which is, we're going to have a p tag that's just going to have a big fat X in it. And so in here, I'm just going to go X, steal one that looks reasonable. So I think that I'm going to pick this one. And I'm going to go class is equal to, and I'm just going to say scale 75. So that's going to scale it down 75%. So now if I click on this, nothing is happening, and we will see why soon. Because I haven't added any on-click functionality to the rest of it. On-click toggle graph. Toggle graph, show graph. So on-click, why is that not coming up? So on-click, that's toggle graph, that's correct. Yes, exactly. Because we haven't added the click to the functionality for the ticker. And so I realized that there was a little spelling mistake up here where this should be stocks instead of stocks. So we're just getting an error with this particular function here, which if we do a little digging, we'll find, what will we find? So we want routes, no, sorry, we want components, stock list. And the mistake is stock. Why is that not working? 0 row titles. I mean, let's just actually comment that out for the minute, because we don't need it, and that's what's causing our problem. So anyway, back down here, we can come back to that in a second. So if we come down here and keep going, so we've completed all of this logic. Actually, no, we will need that. So let's come back up, uncomment it. So something about this is not happy. So if I refresh that page, and if I console.log key, what do we get? Key comes first. So the key is 0 for some reason, object.entries. It actually looks like in this minute we're getting a particular error because for some reason in stock list, we're getting this 2.0 when we console.log. Line 7, okay, so that's the keys here. So keys 1 should be mRNA.financials. For some reason this error, there's an issue in this particular sentence. So key 1, object.keys key. So let's just console.log key 1 and see what that gives us if we refresh the page. So we'll wait for the information to load. We get mRNA. And so that's actually not going to work. So instead what we're going to have to do is go, so that should be, that should be stock. And that should also be stock. So let's refresh that and see if that works. Nope. So where else could it possibly be? Object.keys stock, stock. So what, stocks. It's not the correct spelling. Stocks is equal to stocks. Ah, it is working. Look at that. There you go, mRNA. Cool, so now we have the tickers up and working. The on-click behavior is working, but that's not what we want. We don't want it to take up the entire space. So if we just look for that absolute element, which is just here, we have to make sure that the parent container has an if statement. So up here we have the else, and then we have the div, and the div inside the div. I see. I think this is where our issue is. So this should actually be a container. So we have the else, and then we have a div, and this should wrap around this if, I believe. So if I come down here, it's going to be this one just here, which is going to be this one. Refresh that. We're back to the 0, and now we get the, okay, so at least that works properly. So we're getting these random zeros at the start, but we can come back and fix that in a minute, but toggle is working correctly. So, cannot read properties undefined reading map. So where's that happening? That's stock list 39. So let's have a look for that. 39 prices. So here we have a slight issue. Cannot read properties of undefined. That is odd. So vals equals stocks. Dot find stock. Let's just make sure that's correct. Dot find stock. Object.keys stock is equal to ticker. I forgot a particular thing. We need that in there. So now let's see if that works. We get the 0, I don't know. Okay, it loads. And we no longer get the random error. Okay, so that's good. So, onwards and upwards. The next thing that we're going to do is fix all our problems, thank goodness. So we're going to come down here to, where are we going? Let's have a look. So after the second if, and then after the div, so just here, we're going to need to enter some new lines. So after those two if statements, we're going to make all the rest of our rows. And so we're going to have some logic. So it's going to be each, and then the array is going to be day price, because we want to include the day price. And then I'm going to spread, spread syntax, spread row titles as financial. So I'm going to call it financial, assign it to that. I'm going to close the each block. And up here, I'm just going to go, I'm going to put in a div. Into that, we're going to have hashtag if object.keys stock 0 equals ticker. So if that's the case, we're going to enter that. We're going to return a div with class truncate so it doesn't overflow. Just make sure I spell it properly. Close that, and then in here we're going to render out the financial. And then we're going to have an else. And so after this we're going to have a div that has some class text right. And in here we're going to go if financial is not equal to day price, we're going to say, we're going to return the stock object.keys. We're going to get the stock ticker, stock access the 0th index, dot financial. So that's the particular financial that it's looking for. So that's quite a mouthful. And otherwise we're going to have an else. And so here we're just going to go $, because we want the price. This is going to render out the day price, and we're going to go stock object.keys again, stock 0 dot prices 0. Cool, and then we just have to close that if block. So now if we format that, we get some unhappy logic because I think we must be missing a div somewhere. So we have that one, that closes the each. Am I missing a div here? Somehow there should be another each. I closed the if. There's 2 eaches. So it should go if. Did I close that div? Yep, that one closed. So we have a div. Yes, that should be down there just like that. Div f render that div. Is that a closed div? Div class right. We need to close that div, and that is where we close that div. But it's still not happy about that, so somehow we've lost a div in here. So that one closes there, that one closes there, that one closes here. If day price, oh, we have to close the if. But then we have to close this if. That's what I'm missing, so I'm just missing the closing one if. So just like that. So now, moment of truth, cannot read undefined 0. So it's that same issue we keep getting, unquote and promise, cannot read properties of 0. Stock list Svelte 81, which is just up here, stock store. Stocks object.keys 0.filter. So what we're going to do is just come back into our index and just say if stocks.length is greater than 0. Well, what does it say? So we refresh the page. Let's just error handle this for a second. So we get this in the index. We get this, right? This array, the 0th index. That's stocks. So let's just check that we've done everything correctly there. We're getting an array of an array. And I don't know that that's correct. So that's going to be in routes, index.svelte. And that is stocks is equal to, that is my mistake. That is my biggest mistake just there. We should not be having that stocks in there. So that is just going to, well actually we shouldn't even have this in here in the first place. That's madness. Still not happy though. But let's just see. Okay, so I know what the issue is. Routes index.svelte. So get rid of that, get rid of that. We console.log financials, row titles, which is just this, I guess. No, that's line 7. So we do key, then 9 is financials, so tickers. That's not right. Ticker should be, so if we console.log the key, this should actually just be, if that's what that is, then we just want, so key is this array. So we want to get the object.keys.financials. So we should actually just be returning, instead of doing this, I'm going to console that, all right, return object.keys, key dot financials. Let's see how that works. That's way better. Look at that. Oh my goodness, that was stressful. And so now we actually have this display working, and our little thing even works there too. Hectic. That was super silly. So it was actually the fact that I just had a little something up here that was just fiddling with the whole logic and making it all very confusing. But that's coding for you. So, you know, good to debug that together. So now that that's all fixed, sorry for that, we can work on the last feature. Well, actually, let's just check it with one of those. So let's say we add GME. It's going to work. Cool, we get GME. And that even works too. So, I mean, can we remove it? We can remove it as well. Perfect. Add it back. Excellent, and it works. So now we just have the very last feature that we have to work on. So we're going to come in here, close all these silly files, and we're going to go to components and source components. We'll close routes for the second. We're going to make a new file called popup.svelte. And it's going to be relatively simple, nothing crazy. So in here, we're going to have a script as per usual. We're going to say export let toggle graph. That's going to be important. And then down here, what we're going to do is we're going to render a div. And this is going to have a couple of classes. So it's going to be absolute, inset 0, background slate 900, Z40, flex, and flex col. Open that up, enter a couple of spaces, and here we're going to have another div that's going to have a class of MX order, so that'll center it in its space. And in here we're going to have an H2 with a class of, there's going to be a couple classes in this one. So it's select none, cursor, pointer, padding X of 4, text of white, PY of 1, BG amber 500, transition, gotta love our transitions, duration of 200, so it's a little faster, hover, text amber 500, hover, background white, and close that. And then on a new line we're going to have an on click, and that's going to just be toggle graph. And can you guess what this is going to say? That's a good question. I think it's going to say message, which is going to be close. So in this case, what we're going to do is actually give it message. And just to demonstrate how using things up here works, we're just going to say export let message equals close. And so that's just how you kind of communicate variables between the top and the bottom. So now we have close, so that's cool. So if I come up here, go across to our little thing, oh, the graph doesn't work right this second, but you'll see why. And then the other thing we're going to do, so now that we've done the H2, is we're going to come to the bottom of this div, make another div, and that's going to be a class of flex 1 grid, and just place items center to center everything. And in here, we're going to render slot, which is basically just the children content. And so you'll see how that works in a second. So now that we have this little beauty, we're going to come back into our source and into routes. So if we go to routes index.svelte, and just down here above our section, we're going to chuck in some content. Actually, no, we're not. I take that back. We're going to go to stocklist.svelte. And so we're actually going to render it atop of the stuff here. So this is where we had it. If this line's going to come in handy. We'll bring that back. So fShowGraph, what we're going to do is render that component. So it's going to be pop up. Make sure it's imported. We're going to pass it toggle graph. Nice and easy. Close. Actually, this is going to be opened up. So we're going to have children content, and in here we're going to have a div. And inside that div, we're going to open that up and give it some classes. So we're going to have class of MX Auto. We're going to go width of the screen, height is 48, max height is the screen, padding top is 4, relative and overflow of hidden. And in here, what we're going to have, if I just close this, is some each logic. So we're going to map over it. So for vels, as vel, remembering that we set vels here, and we're going to come down here and have a div. And this one's going to have class of absolute, h 0.5. So these are going to be all our points, width of 0.5, background, amber 200. And we're going to give it some funky little styles. So we can actually make this a self-closing div by chucking that line in here. And we're going to say style is, we're going to give it some inline styles. So for that, we're going to need some special syntax. So in here, you can actually just go ahead and add in like JavaScript within the curly braces. So we're going to go minus vals.index of val. So it's going to find the index of the val. It's going to divide by vals.length, and it's going to times by 100, and then we're going to put a percentage. And so that is going to give it a width from the left, and so for each of them it's just going to space them along evenly. And then we're going to go bottom is going to be more curly brackets. We're going to have bracket bracket val minus min bracket divided by bracket max minus min. So that's just going to calculate the vertical percentage and where it sits. And what we're going to do is after that double bracket, we're just going to times it by, oops. After that double bracket, we're going to times it by 90, and then after the bracket, put a percentage on it. So it's a little bit complicated, but nothing too crazy. And that's going to be for each of them. And so now we're going to close that each statement and have that mapped content, and we can say that that should be fine. And now we're going to have some just last final divs. So it's going to be class of absolute, top 0, left 0, background slate 900, text white, and this is where we're going to display some text. So text extra small, and in here we're just going to tell them the max. We're going to copy this line, and in here we're going to say min, except change some stuff. So instead of saying top 0, we're going to say bottom 0, but everything else is going to be the same. And then the last one is just going to be div. Open that up, and in here we're going to say class is equal to, except this is going to be some funky JavaScript. So we're going to say absolute text center top 0, left 0, width full, space plus, and we're going to have the backticks, and so this is going to be $ vals.index of max minus vals.index of min greater than 0, question mark, we're going to return text lime 500, so it's going to be green if it's going up at the moment. Otherwise, we're going to get some not so good text rows 400, so it's going to be red if it's bad. And so in here we just have to actually render out that dollar content. So we're going to close that and just write div. And in here we're just going to go $, vals 0. So that's the most recent value. And so that should actually be just about it. So if I open this up, click GME, click on graph, we can see that we get that graph plotted. All those points nice and neat. Close the graph, mRNA, we get a different graph. add the stock ticker in. Let's go PFE. And magic. Just like that, I know it was a bit of a mission, but we have a working application for some stock analysis. You could go ahead and style these however you want, make them different colors. You could add some gradients for good to bad, depending on which way it's meant to go. All of the state will get saved to local storage, so next time you open up the app, it'll be all good. And the best thing is that it takes 2 seconds to host on Netlify. If you want to know how to do it, let me know in the comments, and I will totally make that happen. If you like the video, like and subscribe. It's greatly appreciated. Leave me some feedback. I just want to make these as good as possible for you guys so I can help you all as much as possible. And catch you guys later. Have a nice night. Peace.